low budget, but just great. They're called the Renown series of Westerns, and that's, RANOWN, which is a contraction of Randolph Scott's name and Harry Brown's name. Harry Brown was his producer. And those Westerns are very compelling to watch. In all ways, the stories they tell are non-conventional. One of them is a telling of, Chaucer's The Pardoner's Tale, of all things. So, is, setting the Pardoner's Tale in the West. That's pretty interesting. But the Baedeker was great. Raoul Walsh, spelled like Raoul, but they pronounced it Raoul. And, Walsh, just the standard spelling, did some very interesting Westerns, particularly one I'm thinking of, which was really a noir film set in the West called Colorado Territory. In fact, Walsh had directed a classic noir called High Sierra, starring Humphrey Bogart and Ida Lupino. Well, he liked it so well, he redid it a couple of years later as a Western. With Joel McCrea and Virginia Mayo. Walsh did some interesting things. Anthony Mann, who I mentioned, terrific Western filmmaker. And then a friend of mine who just died this week, Monty Hellman, he was off the radar in many ways, but he did a couple of extremely revisionist Westerns in the mid-'60s, starring Jack Nicholson and with Warren Oates and Harry Dean Stanton and others. They were shot simultaneously, low budget, The Shooting and Ride in the Whirlwind. And so Hellman did some other Western stuff after that, but he was an intriguing filmmaker who, had his fingers in the West. And Monty made it to 91. Although he may have been older, he said his birth certificate got lost years ago and he wasn't real sure exactly how old he was. But he thought 91 was pretty close to it. And Hellman, by the way, had one of the great lines I've ever heard. He fell in his house about 5 years ago and smacked his head open, and so we were all worried that was going to kill him, but he came back from it, and he sent out a group email, and one of the observations early on is, I learned that there's no such thing as minor brain surgery. So he had a good sense of humor, but he and Jack Nicholson remained close friends right up till Monty's death, earlier this week, or late last week, I guess. Let's see, who else? Oh, Sergio Leone, of course.
Right.
The three he did with Eastwood, and then Once Upon a Time in the West, and then a really terrific film he did with James Coburn that has the worst English title you can imagine. It was released here as Duck You Sucker. But it's one of those spaghetti westerns, and it's really a good film, but given that title, it never caught any kind of audience here. No one wanted to go see a film called Duck You Sucker.
Right.
So I would put those up there. Nick Ray did Johnny Guitar, which is an essential Western. It was one of the first it was maybe the first lesbian Western.
Why do you call it essential?
Well, because it's an absurdist Western. It just takes you to a different realm. And have you ever seen it?
No, I have not.
Yeah, it's a very, very odd movie to watch. Stars Sterling Hayden, Joan Crawford, and Mercedes Cambridge. And, you know, it's a mid-1950s film, but it's obviously that Joan Crawford and McCambridge had some kind of romantic involvement with each other that ended in an ugly way, and now they hate each other.
Mm.
And Joan Crawford is just at her weirdest, most gothic kind of strange character in this. But that has to be seen because it breaks every rule of the Western. And Nick had done a film that's kind of hokey to watch in a lot of ways, but it certainly has his stamp on it as an altruistic filmmaker. It was called The True Story of Jesse James. With somebody like Robert Wagner as Jesse James, and I think Tab Hunter as Frank James. And of course it's far, far, far from the true story. But, you know, within the confines of a Hollywood, cookie cutter Western, which is what he was basically given to make. You know, Nick Ray always did some interesting things with the camera. The pacing of the film's interesting. You know, Nick did some cool things. Now, he did what we call a contemporary Western, which was a rodeo film set in the 1950s that he did for RKO when Howard Hughes owned the studio, and Howard Hughes insisted on involving himself with every picture, and he changed the title of the picture to The Lusty Men. But it's Robert Mitchum as a rodeo cowboy, and it's one of the 2 or 3 great rodeo pictures. And so Nick did a terrific job with that as well. I find Nick's films to be very, very interesting, and I can't even imagine. And he had, I don't know if you know that much about Nicholas Ray's life, but he was a difficult man in many ways, and did some outrageous things, like he had an affair with what's her name? The woman who was in The Searchers, who played the Indian.
Natalie Wood?
Natalie Wood. He had an affair with Natalie Wood when she was about 14 years old. And then Nick was, married this woman who started sleeping with his teenage son. You know, he had all this craziness, to deal with. And this was, I think he fathered Nick. How old is she?
Nika she's my age. She's, soon to turn 60.
Okay. So you guys are about 5 years younger than I am. And so she must have been from about a third marriage, something like that.
She's from a third marriage.
And so she was, her dad by that point was getting heavily into drug addiction, you know, and, so I can't, well, I do know what it was like because I've read her book, but, you know, God, the poor woman, a lot of challenges of childhood for her to have gone through, but
there are no pictures of her and her dad. None.
I know.
Zero. Yeah. That blew me away.
Well, you know, it's weird how that stuff works. There's a legendary University of Texas football coach named Darrell Royal. You know, in terms of college football, you know, he's one of the, right up there with Bear Bryant and those guys in terms of legends. And he never had any pictures of him taken with his children. I can't even imagine what that's about, but yeah, you know, he did some interesting things in the West, and that Johnny Guitar film is just so outrageously revolutionary in terms of a Western film that alone makes him, you know, an essential director to see of how he handles the West. You get into Howard Hawks. I'm not as big on Howard Hawks' Westerns as a lot of people are, but, you know, he did,